Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and welcome back to another episode of Gamers Encyclopedia Phoenix Edition, a series that outlines long-running franchises of video games. So today's episode is going to be on one of many of SNK's fighting franchises, being Samurai Shodown, which is one of the weapon-based fighting game series that got popular before Soul Calibur. So as per usual, I'm going to be taking a look at the mainline series, and then I'm going to be looking at some spin-offs, and then at the end of it all, I'll take a look at the timeline, because it is pretty interesting the way how they did the timeline for this series. Just as an added bonus for those that really cared about the story. So without further ado, let's begin where the first game started. And that happens to be Samurai Shodown, also known as Samurai Spirits in Japan. So it was developed by SNK, and it was also published by SNK, although the digital versions were published by Hamster Corporation. So it was released in 1993 for the arcade and the Neo Geo, and in 1994 it came out on the Neo Geo CD, the Game Boy, the SNES, and the Genesis. And oddly enough, there is also a Game Gear version in 94. And then in 95 it came out on the Sega CD and the 3DO. And finally, for 95, there was the FM Towns version, and then there was the PlayStation 1 version in 98 that was only in Japan. And as for the digital versions, you can get it on PS3's PSN in 2007 for Japan only, Wii's Virtua Console in 2007 for Japan, and then in 2008 it came out to the rest of the world. Then the PS4 version came out worldwide in 2016, while the Nintendo Switch and Xbox One came out worldwide in 2017. And as for the review scores, they seem to be very positive, although there is certain versions that did get some mixed results, but most versions end up getting some pretty good results. So as you can see, this one got a lot of fucking ports. So the only versions that I've ever played myself were the Neo Geo and the Super Nintendo one. So obviously, the Neo Geo one is the best one you'd want to get. The Super Nintendo one, I did like it for the time I played it, but it definitely doesn't hold up as well. Now, since this is a fighting game, I'm mostly going to be covering over all the different playable characters in each game. So of course you have the main character, Horomaru, Nakaruru, Ukyo Tachibana, Wan Fu, Tam Tam, Charlotte Christine Claude, Galford D. Whaler, Kiroshiro Senro, Earthquake Hanzo Hatatori, Jubei Yagyu, and Gen, and the final boss being Shiro Takasada. But interesting enough, there are two exclusive characters on the Game Boy versions, and they happen to be Haikyaku and Kuroko, and by the way, Kuroko happens to be the referee. So I'm sure as you might be able to tell, Samurai Shodown was a more dark and more violent fighter than any of the other SNK fighters at the time. For that, if you end up finishing off an enemy with a special attack, you can actually decapitate them, and of course there is splurts of blood. So yeah, pretty standard stuff, but it is still a fun time. So now let's get moving on to Samurai Shodown 2, or Samurai Spirits 2. So as again, it was developed by SNK and also published by them, and then some of the digital versions were published by Hamster Corporation. So in 94 it came out for the arcades, the Neo Geo, the Neo Geo CD, and then 95 for the Western version of the Neo Geo CD, and then it came out for the Neo Geo Pocket Color in 1999. And then the original version on PC came out in 96. But there are other versions of it on PC, such as the GOG version and whatnot. And then there was a PS1 version in 98, but only in Japan. And as for PS3's PSN, that one came out in 2007, and as again, only in Japan. And then the Wii Virtua Console, it came out in 2008 worldwide. And same thing goes for the Xbox 360 version. And then it was on the Neo Geo X in 2012, and then it was on ISOs and Android in 2013, and then it came out in 2017 for PS4, Xbox One, and the GOG version, and then in 2018 it comes out for the Nintendo Switch. And the producer of this one is Ikichi Kawasaki. And as for the online review scores, as again, it's very similar to the first one, where certain versions were very positive, while other ports were not handled as well. So not only did the second one make a lot of improvements, but also is a damn good game in general. And rather than taking from the existing game and just improving upon it, they actually built it from the ground up again. And they added much more movesets that you can do, such as back rolls. And of course, there is the parry technique. Now as for the characters, all the ones that were in the original game are re-present here, except for Tam Tam. But as for the new characters, you got Genjuro Kibagami, Cham Cham, Night Health Sigger, and Nicotine Caffeine. I just realized what the old man's name actually was. And the boss this time is Mizuki Rasojin. And Kuroko is only playable in some of the console versions. So when it comes to this one, I've only played the Neo Geo version, and all I can say is that it really is a great fighting game, probably one of the best in the series in my opinion. But it is a shame that for a long time, there wasn't nearly as many ports like the first game, but at least now it's much more easier access. So now let's get moving on to the third one, being Samurai Shodown 3, Blades of Blood. So this one was developed by SNK, and then the PS1 version was developed by Yuki Yotai, and the Saturn version was done by Sims. And it was published by SNK, although the PS1 version was published by Sony, and Saturn was published by Sims, and then the Hamster Corporation did the digital versions. So in 1995, it came out for the arcades, the Neo Geo CD, and as for 1996, it came out for the PS1, the Sega Saturn, but that one stayed in Japan, and then the Game Boy, which also stayed in Japan. Then it came out on PS3's PSN in 2007, and then the Wii Virtual Console in 2010, but that one was worldwide. And then the PS4 and Xbox One versions came out in 2018, but only in Japan so far. So as for the online review scores, this one did get some positive reviews, but not nearly as positive as the first two games, but it still had a couple good reviews, but it also did have some really fucking bad ones. And those bad ones coming from the PS1 version, which I never played. So as you might tell, this one might be considered as the black sheep in the series, and you wouldn't be wrong by that. But while this one does add in a few newer characters, unfortunately it also does remove quite a few of them. And apparently, one of the reasons why some of these characters were removed had to do with the fact that this game is trying to go for a different direction where they're trying to make it even more darker. In fact, one of the characters, Kiyoshiro, actually had an entirely different design. But as for the new characters, there's Shizamaru, Rimuru, Garia, Basara, Zankuro Minazuki, and finally Shikuru. So while it is disappointing that this one does have a much smaller cast, the one good thing I will say is that this one they actually redid all the character sprites, and I gotta say, I really like the way how they made them look in this one. It looks really beautiful. But one extra thing that was added in this one was that there's two different versions of playstyles that you can do with each character. For an example, there is Slash and Bust, and it's going to be different depending on the character that you picked. So this one I only played the Neo Geo version, and I gotta say, this one is a pretty good game. I don't like it as much as 1 or 2, but I still think it does have its good parts. But like I said, the most disappointing part would have to be the small cast. Now, even though I never played the PS1 version, I can only imagine how bad it could have been done, considering what the reviews have been saying. But one extra thing I will say is that if you're going to play the Neo Geo version, I will say this game is a lot harder than the other two. And now let's get moving on to Samurai Shodown 4, Amakusa's Revenge, or in Japan it's called Samurai Spirits, Amakusa's Descent. So this one was developed by SNK and it was also published by SNK, and the digital versions were published by Hamster Corporation. So in 1996 it was released for the arcade, the Neo Geo, and the Neo Geo CD, and then in 97 it came out on the PS1 and the Sega Saturn, but only in Japan. It then came to PS3's PSN in 2007, and then the Wii Virtual Console in 2012, and the Nintendo Switch version came out in 2017. But one thing I will say is that I actually made this stuff like way ahead of time, and now they actually have them on PS4 and Xbox One, which came out last April. Just in case you're wondering why I didn't list a date for those, because I made this before the dates were revealed. But there is no online review scores to be shown. So this one did change up the graphics a little bit more, and this one still does look really good, but I personally like the way how they looked in 3 a little bit better. But the main important thing is that this one does bring back a lot of the older characters that were missed out on the last game. And they still kept a lot of the same mechanics from the last one, but they did improve it a lot more. So I guess you can say that Samurai Shodown 4 feels more of a return to form, and I think they did a really damn good job with this one. But there is only 2 new characters, and they happen to be Kazuki Kazuma and Sogetsu Kazuma. And oddly enough, Cham Cham is a PlayStation exclusive character. So even though there may not be a lot of newer characters that were added in here, at least it did got a good bulk of the older characters, and I do think they all do really well with that. I still think 2 is still the best one, but this one is still really good otherwise. So now let's get moving on to Samurai Shodown 5, or Samurai Spirits 0. So the Neo Geo version was developed by SNK Playmore, and Yuki Enterprise did the Xbox and PS2 versions. And it was published by SNK Playmore, but Ignition Entertainment did the PS2 version. So in 2003, it was released for the arcade, the Neo Geo, and the Xbox, but in 2004 it was released for the PS2, but in 2006 it was released in the PAL region for PS2. And PS3's PSN got it in 2015, and the planning was done by Dorio Takaya. And as for the online review scores, this one seems to get pretty mixed results, but it did get some good reviews, but not nearly as much as the others. So as you may know, this is the first game in the series that was not developed by plain old SNK. It was SNK Playmore after SNK collapsed in 2001. And surprisingly enough, they were still making them on Neo Geo hardware. Also, in case you're wondering what's with the 0 in the Japanese title, well, that indicates that this game is indeed a prequel to the entire series. So this one has a lot of characters that you all know and recognize, but it also does have a lot of new entries. So there's Yumeji Korochi, Yoshitora Takagawa, Senkura Yorizu, Liu Yunfei, Resetsumaru, Mina Magikina, Rura Enja Suja, Yukai Kasurogido, Gao, and finally, Poppy. Yep, just regular ass Poppy. So this one did take things a little bit back to basics, and all things considered, it is a pretty good game, but I wouldn't say it's as good as some of the other ones, so I guess this one is also kinda considered as a black sheep. But as I said, this one is still a pretty solid entry, but I don't think it's as good as some of the other ones, even though it does have a really good cast of characters, even though some characters are pretty OP. So I guess because of that, a lot of the competitive people just don't like this one, but as for me personally, for someone that just plays fighting games casually, yeah, not bad. But the only one downside to this version is that there's another version of it that came out that pretty much made this one feel very obsolete. We'll get there in a second, but one interesting little fact I do want to mention is that the same artist that did the art for Rurouni Kenshin also did the cover art for this game, which is pretty awesome. So now let's get to that other version, and that being Samurai Shodown 5 Special, or Samurai Spirits 0 Special. So this one was developed by SNK Playmore and Yuki Enterprise, and it was published by SNK Playmore. And in 2004, it was released for the arcade and the Neo Geo. And there are two different PC versions you can get. You can get one from Humble Bundle that came out in 2016, and GOG, which came out in 2017. And then you can also get it on PS4's PSN in 2017. And the planning is the same from before, Dorio Takaya. So not only is this one like a major update in terms of gameplay, but also did change up some of the storylines. But one interesting feature I will mention here is that it actually borrowed something from the Guilty Gear series, and that being a one-hit kill move, which of course works the same way like in that game does. So now this one doesn't have any brand new characters, but it does have characters that were not in the first version of Samurai Shodown 5. So two characters, Senkuro and Yumeji, were replaced with older boss characters from some of the older games. And the character Poppy was replaced by Mizuki. So yeah, this one is not only way better than the other version, but this one might actually be one of my other favorites. I don't know if I'd still say it's as good as 2, but I do think it is pretty damn close. And yeah, they were really pushing that Neo Geo hardware because this was the last game to be released on that in the series. So now let's get moving on to Samurai Shodown 6, the final main entry in the series thus far. So it was developed and published by SNK Playmore and was released in the arcade in 2005 and 2006 for North America. Kinda surprised we actually got this over here. And then a PS2 version came out in 2006, but only in Japan. And then it was on PS3's PSN in 2014, and only in Japan. And then in PS4's PSN, they put it on North American servers in 2016. Unfortunately, this is one of the few games in the series that I have yet to play at all, so I can't really say a whole lot on it. But it does seem like a really good one, where it has a lot of characters, a lot of older ones and some newer ones. So the newer ones that are in here is Ochamaru, Sagoroku, Iroha, and Andrew. Yeah, best character. And there are alternate versions of other characters. But yeah, hopefully one of these days I'll get around to playing this one, and I guess one other thing that is worth saying, even though it's pretty obvious, is that the Neo Geo hardware that they've been using since the beginning of the series just wasn't gonna cut it anymore. I guess you can say it was getting too old for this shit. So far, these are the main entries, but now we're going to be taking a look at some of the spin-offs. So the first spin-off we're going to take a look at is Samurai Shodown 64, and I figured I would include the follow-up one, Warrior's Rage. And before you ask, no, Samurai Shodown 64 was not on the Nintendo 64, despite the whole gimmick that they had. So it was developed and published by SNK, and it was released on the Hyper Neo Geo 64 in '97. And then Warrior's Rage came out in '98 for the same thing. So this was the first one in the series to fully be in 3D. As you can tell, the Hyper Neo Geo 64 was one of the arcade boards that can actually render in 3D. But as you might be able to tell, they really didn't utilize this one too much. In fact, this one actually didn't get very many games on it. So other than the other Samurai Shodown games, there was Extreme Rally, Road's Edge, Fatal Fury, Wild Ambition, Baruki 1, and Beastbusters Second Nightmare. So I never played any of these games, including the Samurai Shodown ones, but just from what I've looked at it seems like a pretty typical 3D fighter from the early days. I can't really say too much on that, unfortunately, but believe it or not, there were some characters that were introduced here. So for the first one, there's Shiki, Hamna, Yuga the Destroyer, Gandara, and Deku. And as for 64 Warrior's Rage, there is Azura, Shadow Azura, Half-Shaded Shiki, Taizan Morizumi, Katakuri Hamna, Enji Kazuki, and finally Soija. But as for the next spin-off, this is where things can get a little bit confusing due to its title. So in Japan it's called Samurai Spirits A New Chapter of Blade, and then in English it's called Samurai Shodown Warrior's Rage, but it has nothing to do with the other Warrior's Rage. So it was developed and published by SNK and was released on the PS1 in 1999 in Japan, 2000 in North America, and it was on PS3's PSN in 2007 but only in Japan, and the producer this time was Hiroyuki Kawano. Why does this name sound very familiar to me? Well, anyways, this one just also happens to be a 3D fighter just like the 64 ones, but is actually not a port. Now as again, this is another one I just never played, but it seems like a lot of people seem to not like this one very much. And I have a feeling one of the reasons why is that there's not a whole lot of older characters. There's only 2 of them that return that are playable, such as Hoamaru and Hanzo Hatatori. So that means all the rest of the playable characters are brand new from this game, and I'm not going to go over them this time, but I will mention one, and that happens to be Samurai. Yeah, they just named a dude Samurai. Woohoo. But also another reason why this one was also considered to be pretty poor is that it was actually the last game to be released in the series for a long time until the release of Samurai Shodown 5, so I guess this is the one that kind of made them realize that they just needed a break. So as for the next one, which won't take long at all, is Samurai Shodown with an exclamation mark at the end. So this one was developed and published by SNK and it was released in Japan only on the Neo Geo Pocket in 1998. Now just from the title of this, you may be thinking it's a port of the original game on the Neo Geo Pocket, but it's actually heavily based around Samurai Shodown 4. And believe it or not, I actually did get around to playing a little bit of this one, and all I have to say is that for a handheld version, it's actually not bad. Now, it's not great or anything, but it does play a lot better than you'd think. But one thing I can kind of see some people drawing towards it is that the art style in this one is more cartoonish, which is pretty amusing, but yeah, otherwise though, there's no new characters that got introduced here, so let's get moving on to the second one. And that happens to be Samurai Shodown with an exclamation mark 2, and this one was developed by SNK and also published by them, and was released for the Neo Geo Pocket Color in 1999 for Japan and North America. So because this one is on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, obviously it's in color. And I have to say, visually, this one actually looks pretty damn impressive. Okay, maybe the character sprites are only in 2 colors, but the backgrounds though, they're really fucking good for Neo Geo Pocket Color standards. So believe it or not, this one is actually based around Samurai Shodown 64 Warrior's Rage. So I guess this is the only version of that game that I've actually played, and I gotta admit, not bullshitting you, this game is actually pretty damn good for what it is. Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed with how well this one turned out to be. But while there were no new characters that were introduced, it did take a bunch that were from the 64 game and also added a few fan favorites. So before you look at this and you write it off as being a shitty handheld fighter, well, believe it or not, I actually think this one is actually pretty damn good. Obviously, it's not nearly as good as some of the other classic ones, but, you know, for a handheld game, not bad at all. So as for the next spin-off, we have Samurai Shodown Sen, or Samurai Spirits Edge of Destiny. So it was developed by SNK Playmore, and it was also published by them in Japan, but it was also published by Xseed in North America and Rising Star Games for the PAL region. So it was released in the arcade in 2008 for Japan, 2009 for North America, 360 got it in Japan in 2009, and 2010 we got it in North America and PAL. So this is another one where they tried to do the whole 3D thing, but this one was obviously much more modern looking. In fact, the art style of this one kind of reminds me of Street Fighter 4. But as again, this is another one that I can't say a whole lot on due to the fact that I never played it whatsoever, and I heard from a lot of people that this one is pretty shitty. Of course, that's not my opinion, but like I said though, I can't really say much on it here, but let's go over some of the newer characters though. So there's Black Hawk, Angelica, Korean, Gyros, Claude, Takachio, Jinbei, Walter, Kim, Draco, Golba, and finally, the most, intense name ever, Jay. And of course, those have some of the more popular characters from the older games too, and a pretty good amount of them. So, 3 more left. Well, technically 2, but anyways, let's get moving on to the next one, and that happens to be Samurai Shodown RPG. Or what it should be truly called is Samurai Spirits, A True Story, Bushido Biographs. So it was developed and published by SNK, and it was released in '97 in Japan only on 3 systems, being the Neo Geo CD, the PS1, and the Sega Saturn. So as for the online review scores here, it seems like this one is actually very positive on all 3 versions, going from the same reviewer here. So as you can tell from the name, this one is indeed an RPG spin-off of the series, and I really wish this one actually came out over here, because this one actually seems like it would have been really interesting. So it's a turn-based RPG, and it does use the same graphics from some of the games, and it looks really great. And of course you acquire party members that are a part of the game, and you can unlock additional characters. So now because this is an RPG and that's only in Japan, of course I have no way to play this one while fully enjoying it, which really sucks. But one thing that would have been really interesting that I heard is that apparently there was a rumor going around back in the day where apparently Working Design was thinking about localizing this game over here, and that would have been awesome, but it turns out that was just complete bullshit. But before this gets too depressing, one glimmer of hope is that there is a fan translation in the works. Now, I don't know how much complete they are, but at least I can say that I'm just glad that at least it's happening. So maybe sometime in the future, once it's complete, I might have to either review it or do a stream on it. Either way, I'll do something with it. So now, let's move on to the last actual game here, and this one is really fucking weird, and that happens to be Nakaroru Ano Haiti Kara no Akuramono. I probably fucked that up, but honestly, you're looking at it right here, you can pronounce it as whatever the fuck you want, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it was developed and published by SNK, and it was only released in Japan in 2001 for Windows and Dreamcast. This is probably the most oddball thing that ever happened in the series. So it's a visual novel / adventure game, and you're playing as mostly original characters that never appeared in anything else. But one of the main characters that is familiar is Nakaruru. So yeah, obviously I never played it, I don't even know if there's a fan translation available of it, but one thing I do know is that apparently this game has a lot of really fucked up glitches where apparently if you save your game at certain spots, the game will crash and it won't save whatsoever. I don't know, this is just from what I've heard, but either way, this is just one of the most oddball things ever. And finally, the last thing I will mention here is Samurai Shodown Anthology. So this one was developed by SNK Playmore and Terminal Reality, and it was also published by SNK Playmore, and it was released on the PS2 in 2008 in Japan, and 2009 for North America and PAL, and 2008 for Japan and for the Wii, and 2009 for North America and PAL, and the PSP version was 2009 for North America and PAL. So yeah, obviously it's a collection of most of these Samurai Shodown games. It comes with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But unfortunately, it does not include 5 Special, which is a shame because 5 Special is just so much better than the other one. But it is a pretty decent collection for the most part if you do have a PS2 or a Wii. But I don't know a whole lot about the PSP version though, but you can get it on there if you want. So that takes care of all the games in the Samurai Shodown series, excluding the mobile ones, because honestly, like, is anyone seriously going to be losing sleep over me not mentioning them? Well, there's a bunch of them, and honestly, I'm just not going to bother with them. But before we end it, I want to take cover of the timeline real quick if you do give a shit about the story. So here's how the timeline goes. It goes Samurai Shodown 5, then Samurai Shodown 1, then 3, then 4, then 2, then 64, then 64 Warriors Rage, then Samurai Shodown Sen, and then Warriors Rage, that one being the PS1 game. So if you did happen to play these games in order by the numbers and you did pay attention to the story, it may seem a little convoluted, but now looking at this, it makes a lot more sense. So there you have it. As of right now, at 2018, this is the Samurai Shodown series of Gamers Encyclopedia Phoenix Edition, and I'll see you guys later, so thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.